Well, good day, everyone, and thanks very much for having me join you today virtually in order to talk about some of the work that's happening here in Toronto and in our Age-Well network. Specifically, what I want to do is talk to you about, obviously, technology and aging, but more specifically, the need and role of smart technologies moving forward. Now, we've all heard already in presentations leading up to this about our global aging population and the need for new solutions in order to help them remain safe at home. This problem has become even more prevalent, especially in Canada, where we have such a difficult situation caring for older adults who may be in retirement homes, long-term care, or even in their own homes, and lacking the tools in order to maintain socially connected. Now, one of the things we've also learned in terms of design for older adults is that it is a tough challenge. This is a very dynamic and heterogeneous population where their needs are complex and even more so in the face of specific impairments and diseases. Now, what we've noticed in the design of a lot of new technologies is more often than not, there's not an understanding of these users' needs as part of the project. I'm still always amazed at the number of projects that come to me or the number of startup companies that want my input. And it's very clear that they are designed specifically for someone that they know, such as their grandparent or their aging parent, and this is not sufficient. Whenever I've given a presentation to a group of older people, I always hear a very similar comment, and that is, when you've seen one older person, you've seen one older person. And therefore, this needs to be taken into account in the design of our technologies moving forward. Finally, there's also been a silo mentality still in our field that has resulted in poor outcomes. While we have many people interested in this area and this topic of technology for older adults, ranging from the social sciences to computer science, I still find that they're not working in a complementary way. And again, this is going to be important in order for us to move forward. Now, perhaps one of the most important aspects is this is a moving target. One piece of technology that is designed for a specific user or demographic is not going to work again, for the future older adult population. Older adults and their caregivers are becoming more tech savvy, and that there's a growing expectation on the integration of technologies into their daily lives. And as such, because of this, we need new ways of thinking and new ways of doing. This includes the development of smart technologies that apply at things such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and other new approaches that are coming out of the fields of computer science, engineering, and others. Using these approaches, we can now design technologies that understand the needs of the older adults that we're developing the technology for and adapt and modify the way they operate accordingly. We need to move away from the previous dumb technologies, such as the pendant that we're all familiar with, that you push obviously if you're in an emergency or if you've fallen, and that typically just don't work for older adults. You know, while we consider this to be one of the most successful commercial products, from a user perspective, it's actually one of the worst. Often, older adults don't wear the technologies themselves. The technologies will not work in all locations for them, and will not work in different types of contexts. For example, we often hear from older people that they don't want to wear the button in front of their friends and family because they don't want them to know that there's something wrong with them. And so again, moving forward using smart technologies and things such as artificial intelligence and new advances in sensors, we can replace these old technologies and come up with something much better and far more scalable down the road. What I want to do right now is then focus on some promising solutions of smart technologies specifically for home use, but these can also then be used in other locations. In my opinion, there's three areas that are really going to be truly disruptive in the area of technology and aging, and that's smart homes, robotics, and big data. So let me give you examples of some of the work that our Age-Well network in Canada is doing in each of these areas. With respect to smart homes, we have projects that we're funding across our country across a variety of areas. These include technologies that can support older people with dementia, for example, through daily activities, through the use of various sensors, cameras, etc., to understand what they're trying to do, and then using an artificial intelligence-based agent to give them the prompts and reminders that they require. We're also using things such as machine learning and deep learning to monitor the activity levels and patterns of living of older adults, and therefore to then try to predict changes in their health before it actually occurs. Finally, we're also using new advances in sensors, such as wearable clothing and textiles, to measure health parameters such as physiological data without the need of your classic type of medical devices. So in this video here, I'll actually show you an example of this. So what you see here is one of our graduate students sitting on a sofa, and we're actually getting a live ECG from the person. Now, this particular individual is not wearing any types of sensors or devices on him, but these sensors are all built into the materials themselves, as you can see represented by these two pieces of copper tape. We've done this not only for things like sofas and other types of textiles, but we're also working with clothing and other common day objects that a person may interact with. In this particular example, this ECG, when compared to a traditional ECG signal, was about 2% error only. So we're actually getting quite accurate results, again, through the types of technologies that you see here. The goal of using these types of things, such as prompting systems for daily activities, patterns of living prediction, and things like measuring health parameters, is that this allows an older adult to go about their everyday routine within their own homes or environments and spaces, and for us to collect this information and provide support in a way that doesn't require any active or proactive requirements from the person to interact with type of technologies. As you can imagine, this can be a significant difference in the usability of these technologies moving forward and the types of data that we collect to do further analysis on. Now, in terms of the area of robotics, there's a lot of work happening now in the two areas of social and supportive robots. What you see here are two examples, and I'll actually show you a video of one of the robots in action. So a social robot is essentially a robot that interacts with a person through conversation, through prompting, through various types of cues and dialogue itself. This can range from idle chit-chat about the weather or about how the person is doing, or as you'll see in the video in a second, a more active approach in supporting older adults with dementia through common activities such as cooking. On this side, you see a supportive robot or a cognitive robot that is actually built to support older adults to maintain their cognition. So in this particular example, this robot is playing the card matching game with this simulated older person. So that is where they have to turn over cards and find matches in order to win the game. So this type of robot, as you can imagine, can be in a long-term care facility or even in the home, playing these types of games with older people and ensuring that they're staying cognitively and mentally challenged throughout the day. Now, before I move on and show the video of our social robot interacting with an older person, I want to address a question that we typically get, and that is, well, shouldn't it be real people doing these things? Isn't that better for the older person? And the answer is absolutely, that is correct. However, anyone who has been in a long-term care facility, especially during the current circumstances that we're going through with the pandemic, know that they're just overworked and overburdened. Care staff and caregivers, including family caregivers, are just trying to get an individual out of bed, dressed, bathed, provide them medications, and keeping them safe. They would love to be able to sit down and play a game with that person, but they just don't have the time. And this is something that robots can do really, really well. So in this example, you'll see our robot actually providing support to the older person during the task of making a cup of tea.
Can you turn the water on now?
So in this situation, it just provided a verbal prompt to them to turn on the water.
Try pressing the switch to boil the water.
So in this circumstance, the robot has actually learned that this person, who is an actual older adult with dementia, actually requires a more detailed prompt to do that specific step. So using things such as machine learning, the device has learned that it needs to actually show a video, which you saw on the robot's face, that also demonstrates how to complete that particular task. Now, the final area is big data, and particularly big data in the home and again where the person is living. As we're hearing about and seeing more and more, and I'm sure some other presentations today have talked about, we're starting to see homes that look like this. You have various types of sensors located throughout the home, such as activity devices, location sensors, bed sensors, smart devices, robots, etc. The question is, what do you do with all this data? You know, we're collecting thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points from a person's home. And we want to be able to use this data to do things such as predict changes in their health, as opposed to just collecting it for the sake of having the information itself. So this is an example taken from one of our colleagues, Jeff Kay, and his group at OHSU, and what they did a few years ago in that project that we worked with them on. This is an example of what you can do with this type of data. You can actually plot it out. And here, this is a graph starting at 0 hours all the way to 2,400 hours. And the different color dots are basically the rooms where sensors are firing to indicate that the person is there. And so what you see here is it's very clear that you can actually start to see a pattern of living for this individual. You can see that they're sleeping from about 11:30 to about 7:30 or 7 a.m. Then they get up and they do some activities in the bathroom, the bedroom, etc. They may go out for a walk here, and etc. So this type of data is very useful to look for changes in the here and now, or in the present. So, for example, what we may see from this type of data is also the person not sleeping as well. Perhaps they're going to the bathroom twice as many times, or not at all. Perhaps they're not going into the kitchen at all, indicating that they're not actually preparing meals or eating properly, or even doing things such as drinking water or hydration. And so at that point, if you see those changes, technology such as this can then provide an alert, or call a caregiver or a family member in order to come and help them out in this particular situation. However, more importantly, what we want to do with these data, and again, is going back to the whole issue of using artificial intelligence and different techniques to predict changes in wellness. So again, across our age-old network, we are funding several projects that's doing just that, such as change in state of chronic conditions like congestive heart failure or diabetes, trying to predict adverse events like falls before they actually occur, and we all know that is the holy grail. Also, prevention of dangerous behaviors. For example, we have a project that is predicting agitation and aggressive behaviors in residents of a long-term care facility and raising an alert to the care staff before it happens. And then in this particular data graph that you see here, this is predicting change in cognition and the onset of dementia. So this data here actually uses the graph that you saw here in the data collected by Jeff Kay's group, and we developed various predictive models using techniques from the machine learning field in order to see how well we can predict change in cognition. And what you see in this data is an algorithm called a support vector machine produced the best results, where about 4 months in or 3 months in of using the data from Jeff Kay's group, we were predicting who would develop dementia with about 85% accuracy. And this number has actually increased recently through the development of further features and the use of more advanced sensors, such as the ones I showed you that collected the ECG information. So there are some examples of smart technologies that are making a difference right now at the research level, and I feel will make a difference moving forward as they are further deployed. But the question is now is what's going to happen with our changing demographic? As I mentioned, it is a moving target. These technologies, while they're being developed now, to be honest with you, by the time they're available commercially and being deployed, it's not going to be the current older adult demographic. It's going to be the baby boomers and beyond that'll be using this type of technology. So one question we need to consider when we talk about smart technology and artificial intelligence is designing for our future selves, as I'm calling it here. And this includes not just technology itself, but in fact, the current landscape with respect to technology and aging, or the age tech sector, as we're calling it in Canada and elsewhere around the world, really needs to change in order for these new innovations to make it to the marketplace moving forward. And when we're developing smart technologies, because they are so advanced and because they are providing assistance in potentially private and difficult activities, the technology is not enough. It is great that we designed that robot that we showed you, but if we don't understand how to deliver that robot to older people and have them accept it, how to change the practice perhaps of caregiving to employ a robot or a smart home, and also the policies that go around that, whether it's privacy or the looking at the device and mandating it through the FDA or through Health Canada, et cetera, really that robot is not going to go anywhere. And we have many examples of these technologies sitting in the labs because they're not considering beyond the tech itself and looking at the service delivery, the practice, and the policy. And so really the question from these particular aspects is, how do we deliver these technologies? And this is becoming really, really important because the technologies that I showed you are not medical devices. They're not things like pacemakers or implantable devices. But in fact, they're actually being developed and looked at more as consumer products. And consumers, such as older adults and more importantly their families, are coming to us and asking, how can they purchase these technologies directly? And how can they purchase this through typical consumer channels as opposed to having them going through their family doctors, their occupational therapists, etc. And so we're starting to actually see that changeover. So here in the United States, Best Buy, a couple of years ago launched their assured living service, and they're doing the same thing in Canada. And so again, this is an example of how a consumer-based organization is starting to take responsibility for technologies for older people. In fact, if you go to the American Best Buy website, they actually have a marketplace for older people where you can buy things anywhere from smart home technologies and sensors, wearable devices, to fall detection systems. Now, one important thing, though, that Best Buy is doing is they are partnering, though, with a clinical partner, such as the Mayo Clinic, as you see here. So, obviously, Best Buy can sell the technology. They can send their geek squad in to help set it up, but they don't have that clinical connection, and that is an important aspect that Best Buy and other consumer-based companies need to consider moving forward. Now, a classic example of a service delivery partner now are things such as autonomous vehicles. And here's a quote, it is a few years old, but still kind of rings true. The self-driving car godsend for older Americans is now on the horizon. Well, I'm not sure how true that is, and not because of a technology perspective, but again, a service delivery problem. Again, we all know that when an older person calls for a taxi or an Uber or a caregiver or a family member to drive them, for example, to the shopping mall or to the grocery store, often it's because they need that physical assistance. They need the assistance perhaps to get from their front door into the car. They need the physical assistance to help put their groceries in the trunk and then to bring them into their kitchen, etc. So the question is, with something like an autonomous vehicle, and many people are working on them for the older adult population, is, well, what happens when a car pulls up to an older adult's home and there is no driver? There is no person to assist them across these various tasks. So again, this is something that we need to be looking at and to study specifically to understand how this type of smart technology truly will change the service delivery approach and the interaction with the older person. And we need to then build that into the design of the systems moving forward. The final question we really need to ask ourselves is, where do we fit into the technology and aging landscape moving forward? As we know, with companies such as Amazon, Google, Best Buy, et cetera, getting involved, many at the development stage, it is becoming far more difficult for us in academia and research to keep pace. Something that would take us maybe 2 or 3 years to develop and to move through the process of commercialization can really be done, in a fraction of the time by these larger companies. And hence why we're also starting to see the success of more startup companies moving forward. So I think as a research community in the technology and aging space, and particularly around the roles of using smart technologies and developing them, we need to really re-examine what we're doing. And so the question is, how do we stay relevant? So as I mentioned, companies like Amazon hiring a geriatrician to lead their special projects division. As I mentioned, all these new startup companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the United States and Canada and Europe and Asia as well, really focusing on the age tech industry. Google Home is now being developed for elderly, as is Amazon Alexa, to provide support. And I recently heard that Amazon is trying to use Alexa also as a fall detection system. And then things like wearable devices, where we can now easily collect things such as heart rate and ECGs from these devices. What's the role of these technologies going to be moving forward? Again, as the baby boomers become the older adult population, where the majority of them may already have something like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, etc. So in my opinion, I feel within 5 years, we'll actually no longer be developing these technologies. We'll no longer be looking at new AI approaches or how to develop smarter sensors or devices. Again, because we just cannot compete with these larger companies that are not only developing the back end, so such as the AI engines and new machine learning approaches, but are now also designing and developing the applications themselves. So where can we have an impact moving forward with respect to smart technologies and technology for older adults in general? So what we had to identify is, well, where are we the experts, and where are the gaps that industry is having? So in terms of us being the experts, we are the experts to understand the needs of older adults and caregivers. We have done a lot of research working with them in order to understand this diverse group. And more importantly, we're able to bring together a diverse group of researchers and stakeholders who are working on these common goals. So we can actually break those silos down, I feel, easier than in industry. We can also be experts in ensuring that the new solutions are tested and implemented through rigorous methodologies and approaches, which typically is not happening right now within industry, from my perspective. And finally, we are also the experts to understand how these new solutions can fit into existing services and delivery models, or developing brand new ones. So again, looking at the case of the current pandemic, where up in Canada we've had a miserable time with our long-term care facilities and many deaths. We are the experts to understand, well, where can a new piece of technology fit into what long-term care is currently doing in order to make things safer and better for not just the residents themselves, but the care staff. So perhaps most importantly, though, is as a field, we can be the window into the future of innovation. We can really have that 5-10 year perspective in academia much easier than industry can, and help to identify where should smart technologies be going, and what type of techniques can be developed, and what new applications are going to be the most important. So finally, in terms of moving forward, the message I want to leave you with is, I feel the time is now. In Canada, the United States, and elsewhere, we're kind of at this unique point, obviously, where we know our populations are aging, as we heard about before, but researchers, industry, and even government are also starting to realize that technology can play a significant role. And the key aspect here is we really truly need to be disruptive. We cannot be just incremental in the field, just building upon previous successes or slowly changing and modifying technology we developed. There's a whole new world out there of new approaches to develop smart technologies that we really need to be taking advantage of, and again, to be truly disruptive in this area. As I just mentioned, to do this, though, we need to reconsider our traditional models and approaches in the design and delivery of future systems. And this is going to be really, really important in order to understand how these smart technologies can fit into the lives of older people and their caregivers. And finally, we must be prepared to rethink our own roles in moving forward in this field. If we try to hold on to the fact that we are technology developers and that's all we do, then I think we are going to become really disadvantaged when it comes to working with industry and trying to develop scalable solutions, which is really needed more than ever right now. And so we really need to take advantage of industry's interest in this area, in the techniques and the approaches that they can provide and support us with, and really build open relationships with these companies moving forward in order to make a big change in the technology and aging field. So with that, I thank you very much for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Here's my contact information, so feel free to always reach out to me. I'm happy to set up virtual meetings after this conference in order for us to discuss the work that we're doing more and more. So with that, thanks very much, and I'll take some questions now.